Saddle up and subscribe for False Star, a wild western action adventure. Chapter 1. A weathered rifle barrel, reflecting a dull, predatory gleam, parted the tangled, dusty leaves of the thorny chaparral that clung tenaciously to the very lip of the stark, chalky bluff overlooking the desolate expanse of Sweetwater Gulch. Below, the heat already shimmered in visible waves, distorting the air above the parched earth. The rifle's sight, a simple, deadly notch of steel, settled with unwavering precision, lining squarely on the chest of the lone horseman who had just ridden into the sun-baked, silent draw far below. He seemed a small, solitary figure against the immense backdrop of rock and sky. Peering through the sights of the worn .30 to .30 Winchester were a pair of eyes as hard and unforgiving as hammered steel, yet possessing a sharp, unsettling brightness like freshly chipped quartz catching the light. Staley, a man etched by sun and wind and bitterness, had been squatting patiently, almost unnaturally still, within the concealing density of the brush since the first pale fingers of dawn had touched the eastern ridges. All morning, his flinty, narrowed eyes, shaded beneath the brim of a sweat-stained hat, had remained fixed, trained with a hunter's unwavering focus on the winding, treacherous trail which snaked like a pale ribbon through the vast silent emptiness of Whetstone Basin, on its dusty, inevitable way to the sleepy, almost forgotten little cow town of Latigo. The air was thick with the dry scent of sage and baked earth, disturbed only by the drone of unseen insects. The sudden sight of this approaching horseman, emerging from the shimmering distance, sent a jolt through Staley's wiry frame, making him tense with a cold, predatory excitement that tightened his grip on the rifle. The rider, astride a sturdy roan, was still a good 100 yards distant from the meticulously chosen ambush point, a distance that felt both vast and intimately close through the rifle's sights. Yet, even across that sun-drenched space, Staley clearly saw the slanting rays of the ascendant morning sun catch and glint fiercely off a six-pointed nickel star pinned prominently to the man's dusty vest. A symbol of law, stark and defiant in this lawless land. "Rip Campbell," whispered the hidden man, the name a mere breath of sound lost almost instantly in the immense silence, his voice raspy from disuse and the dryness of his throat. He cuddled the smooth, familiar walnut stock of the Winchester more firmly against his weathered cheek, the cool wood a strange comfort. "By the Almighty, he's done his last sheriffing, by gosh." A thin, cruel smile touched Staley's lips, disappearing quickly back into the harsh lines of his face. The world seemed to narrow to the space between the rifle's sight and the distant, gleaming star. Staley's rifle barrel remained as steady as the ancient rock upon which he knelt. He raised it incrementally, smoothly, drawing a straight, unwavering bead on that small, glistening spark of reflected fire which glowed like a malevolent eye on the approaching lawman's vest front. Down below, the man on the horse, Sheriff Campbell, kept his gaze fixed downward, his attention seemingly absorbed by the twisting, rubble-carpeted trail that demanded careful navigation. His face, tanned and square-jawed, was deeply shaded by the wide, floppy brim of his dark Stetson, rendering his expression unreadable from the bluff. He rode with the easy posture of a man comfortable in the saddle, utterly oblivious, possessing no inkling or premonition of the dry gulcher, concealed like a viper in the brush less than 80 yards ahead, patiently waiting to spit death. The only sound was the rhythmic clink of the horse's shod hooves on loose stone. Spang! The sharp, spiteful report of Staley's carbine shattered the morning's profound stillness, the sound unnaturally loud in the enclosed gulch. It crashed against the juniper-dotted ridges, echoing, rolling, and then crashing back again, a savage announcement that ripped through the peaceful facade of the landscape. The dry gulcher peered intently down the hazy length of the draw through narrowed, slitted eyelids, a hunter assessing his kill, as he slowly lowered the smoking rifle until it rested across his knees. Through the acrid, lazily drifting cloud of blue gun smoke which hung heavy and motionless in the sweltering, breathless air before him, he watched the result of his shot. He saw the uniformed figure of the officer jerk violently, bolt erect in the saddle, as if struck by an invisible fist, reacting purely to the brutal unseen impact of the heavy lead slug which had unerringly found its mark, drilling through flesh and bone to extinguish the life in his heart. The roan horse, stung perhaps by rock fragments or simply reacting to the sudden, convulsive movement of its rider and the deafening blast, shied violently, slamming its shoulder against the shelving, crumbling bank of the gulch. Its rider, already dead or dying, began swaying precariously, top-heavily, like a grotesque puppet whose strings had been cut. His hands, trained by instinct, faltered away from the sturdy pommel, moving instinctively, uselessly, to clutch at the sudden, shocking agony in his chest. Then, suddenly, seeming to crumple inward upon himself, as all strength fled, the sombreroed figure pitched sideways and toppled lifelessly from the saddle. Deprived instantly of the accustomed weight and guidance of its rider, the terrified horse plunged backward, its head thrown high, nostrils flaring wide, snorting sharp, panicked blasts of air. Its eyes rolled wildly, white showing starkly against its dark coat. As Campbell's body fell, the brief, sharp sparkle of midday sunshine glancing off the decorative brass studs adorning the fallen rider's heavy leather sleeve cuffs seemed to catch the animal's eye, a small flicker of movement near the ground. This final, small detail appeared to push the horse over the edge into utter, mindless terror. It arched its powerful back, muscles bunched like coiled springs, bucking away frantically from the source of its fear, from the scent of blood and the sprawled, unmoving shape on the ground. Finn Staley's jaw, moments before set in grim satisfaction, dropped open in stunned, momentary horror. His eyes widened as he saw the unthinkable happen. The dead rider's heavy spur, entangled in the intricately tooled leatherwork, had somehow caught fast in the swinging stirrup. For several mad, ghastly seconds, frozen on the bluff above, Staley witnessed the grotesque spectacle. The limp, unresisting form of the dead lawman being brutally jerked and slammed about like a discarded sack of excelsior, disappearing and reappearing under the choking pall of dust kicked up by the fear-crazed roan's pounding hoofs. Then the sickening scrape and clatter of steel shoes echoed over the scattered rocks, as the horse, finally breaking free from the immediate vicinity of the body, bolted and galloped madly down the open draw, reins flinging wildly like dark ribbons, white eyes rolling in sheer animal panic. The pursuing dust cloud traced its desperate flight. Abruptly, the limp body of the rider wedged hard between two jagged, sun-bleached rocks jutting from the gulch floor. There was a final, violent tension, and then it jerked free from the clinging stirrup with a sickening, audible pop of snapping bone that carried faintly up to Staley on the bluff. The body lay still, horribly twisted among the stones. Crack. Once more, Finn Staley's rifle blasted the renewed silence, the sound seeming even harsher this time. But it wasn't directed at the crumpled heap below. This time, it was the riderless, fleeing horse which pitched violently forward, as if hitting an invisible wall, mid-stride, collapsing in a heap of trembling muscle and bone. A neat, dark bullet hole drilled precisely through the center of its forehead, extinguishing its panic forever. Can't take no chances. No chances of Campbell's horse getting to Latigo ahead of Roper's gang, muttered the dry gulcher grimly to himself, the momentary horror replaced by cold, brutal pragmatism. He finally pushed himself fully erect, stretching cramped muscles, the smoking rifle held loosely in one hand. He stood outlined against the sky on the bluff's edge, a solitary, dangerous figure surveying the deadly tableau he had created in the quiet gulch below. The sun beat down, indifferent. Chapter 2. A nervous grin split Staley's face as he pumped a fresh cartridge into his carbine. It had been easy enough for the dry gulcher to keep a steady nerve, as long as he was secure in the safety of his ambush. But now he stood revealed in the hot Wyoming sunlight, the smoke fuming from his rifle barrel. A star, francular to the one on the chest of the man he had just killed, gleamed from the pocket of Finn Staley's sweat-stained shirt. For Staley was a deputy sheriff in the town of Latigo. He was a tall, stoop-shouldered man, with a face as swart and seamed as a Mexican's. A putty white scar was scribbled from the corner of his drooping mouth to one ear, a relic of some saloon brawl in the past. A cartridge bandolier crossed his narrow chest, while double gun belts encircled his waist. Well forward on either thigh, A shiny holster with a big butted .45 was held down by buckskin thongs. He wore Cheyenne-style chaps and high-heeled boots with butterfly inlays. Sharp-roweled spurs jangled as he walked. A born killer was Finn Staley. But not one of the 13 notches he wore on his guns was earned in fair fight. Staley was a dry gulcher. Farther south, they would call him a cutbanker, a killer from ambush. Yellow light glowed in Staley's eyes as he peered off down the draw, where he had been lying in wait for Sheriff Rip Campbell since early dawn. He had known that Campbell would be in this part of the country, for that day was the day he was going to collect license fees from the scattered trappers who lived in this section of the Thundergust foothills. As Rip Campbell's only deputy, he had been ordered to remain in Latigo to take care of what office business might come in. He saw the dead man's form, wedged between two rocks and pulled oddly out of shape by the horse which now lay, legs stretched out stiffly from its still body a little farther down the gulch. A danged good job, Staley told himself, writhing his supple body out of the brush and making his way toward the mouth of a rocky defile some distance away. I bet Monty Roper'll give me a good slice of the cash for this little trick. Staley felt a thrill surge through his skinny body, even as the name of Monty Roper crossed his thin, tobacco-stained lips. Monty Roper was the unchallenged leader of Western outlawry. His deeds on the Owl Hoot Trail ranged from cattle rustling in Texas to train robbery in the Sierra Nevadas. Gradually, Roper had assembled a crew of case-hardened gunmen about him. He took only the most desperate, crack gunmen from south of the Rio, badly wanted criminals from the States. He knew that in union there was power. With a leader like Monty Roper, this daring band of outlaws had spread a reign of terror over the entire West. Finally, the Texas Rangers had started a drive against Roper and his gang south of Amarillo. So they had fled to Chihuahua, only to be beaten off by the Mexican rurales. After heavy losses, Roper had retreated to New Mexico. But hard-boiled United States Marshals cooperated with local sheriffs and deputies in carrying on war against the operations of Monty Roper. Miners and prospectors, enraged by the tales of torture and death which had been inflicted upon their mates by Roper's outlaws, drove them from the mountains. Sure death awaited them on the cattle ranges. Railroads posted extra guards, armed to the teeth, on their express and mail cars. Finally, Monty Roper had brought what was left of his band to Wyoming and vanished in the rugged, canyon-torn upheaval of Malpais or Badlands known as Whetstone Basin. He had denned up with his gang somewhere in the sun-scorched Thundergust Mountains. Roper made it a point to visit the nearby towns, for he was a stranger in Wyoming and knew he would not be recognized. No lawman had ever dropped his loop on Monty Roper. No sheriff's dodger or ruralese poster had carried his picture under a reward sign. It was on one of these trips to the little town of Latigo that Monty Roper had spotted Finn Staley. The outlaw was a shrewd judge of human nature, so instantly he had marked the shifty-eyed deputy as a traitor. And as such, he would be a valuable ally for Roper and his outlaw band if he weren't trusted too far. Roper had made Staley's acquaintance over a crap table. He had wedged in his acquaintance with frequent bottles of whiskey. And it had pleased the big outlaw when he had seen the deputy's face go pasty gray when he found out who his drinking companion was, Monty Roper, the most wanted crook in the West. Roper had made Staley a proposition, a deal that promised rich reward. "We're holed up in the hills and short of cash," Roper had said. "We want to rob this bank in Latigo, but we ain't tackling the job so long as this wild cat, Rip Campbell, is sheriffing. You get rid of Campbell and let us know. It'll be worth a third of the swag, and Monty Roper's word ain't been questioned yet." Had Staley refused, or shown even the slightest signs of reluctance, Roper was prepared to silence him forever with the Bowie knife he carried in a sheath back of his collar. But Roper always figured men rightly. He knew Staley's breed. Staley had accepted eagerly. It meant that he would be a trustee in the great Roper gang, living a double life. A deputy, generally believed to be a harmless coward in Latigo, but a spy, a traitor in the employ of Monty Roper at the same time. It was a job to Staley's cowardly liking. A week had passed, while the craven deputy bided his time. He feared the young, clean-cut sheriff even more than he feared Monty Roper. And his chance had come that day. Staley found his black-and-white Pinto where he had left it, back in the shelter of the rock-ribbed defile. He removed rawhide hobbles, thrust his smoking .30 to 30 back into the brush-scarred saddle boot, and mounted. An hour later, he paused on the crest of a boulder-piled divide and glanced back over the country behind him. Nothing moved on that dreary, aspen-dotted expanse. The distant peaks of the Big Horns danced like purple veils in a breeze under the heat waves. A cruising buzzard wheeled on motionless wings up in the burnished pewter sky. No one was following him. No one had seen him. Finn Staley had done his work well. He turned in his saddle, legs heaving as the sweat-plastered horse panted heavily. Reaching in a saddlebag, the treacherous deputy lifted a brand-new tin pie plate to view. His black eyes roved across the greasewood flats before him. A mile away, a gigantic upthrust of nature's masonry jutted heavenward, a mighty skyscraper of red stone. It was Poker Table Butte, the rocky summit of which was 1,000 feet above the basin floor. Staley fumbled in his shirt pocket and drew forth a folded cigarette paper. Holding it in the shade of his sombrero brim, he read the penciled words which had been scrawled on the paper by the fingers of Monty Roper, the outlaw, and passed to him a week ago in a Latigo saloon. When you kill Campbell, ride to Circle Ridge and flash a light 3 times, then 2 times. Wait for an answer from Butte. We will ride at once, horses always ready. M.R. Staley reached in his chap's pocket for a match, lighted it, and touched the flame to one corner of the paper. It wilted into a film of ash and floated to the earth, unmoved by the slightest tug of wind. Then he lifted the shiny pie tin, twisting it between his thumbs until the bright surface caught the blinding rays of the sun. For several minutes, he moved the pie plate, repeating Roper's mystic signal in his mind. And then, from a shadowy niche far up the shoulder of Poker Table Butte's frowning heights, a spot of dazzling brilliance gleamed like a star. The bandit's signal. Chapter 3. The distant sharp crack of a rifle, thin and piercing in the vast stillness, caused Sheriff Rip Campbell to draw rein instinctively, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly on the worn leather. He sat atop his sturdy roan, on the crest of a low sun-baked knoll sparsely covered with the twisted dark green shapes of dwarf pinon and the dusty gray-green foliage of juniper. The air hung heavy and silent, shimmering with heat under the immense pale blue Wyoming sky. Moments later, like a faint deadly echo rolling across the desolate land, a second shot wafted indistinctly to his ears, seeming to underscore the profound emptiness surrounding him. Rip Campbell, a man long and lean, with eyes the clear penetrating color of the skies just after a cleansing thunderstorm, scanned the shimmering distant horizon, his gaze sweeping over the endless waves of sage and rock. Frank must have finally killed that big gray wolf he's been tracking, likely caught in one of his traps near the rimrock, grunted the clean-cut young sheriff, his voice low, more a thought spoken aloud to the immense quiet than a statement. He squinted against the glare reflecting off the arid land. He said he'd set a few near Sweetwater this morning. The sheriff broke off abruptly, his easy posture stiffening in the saddle. His sky-blue eyes widened slightly, a sudden cold realization dawning within him. In a sharp, unwelcome flash of memory, he remembered with startling clarity that when he had left Frank Barnes, the grizzled trapper, not half an hour before, down by the whispering seep of Sweetwater Gulch, the man distinctly did not have a gun with him. Not his old sharps, not even a pistol. For a full, heavy minute, the young sheriff sat his horse motionless there in the heart of the whispering, aromatic chaparral. The sun beat down relentlessly, drawing the scent of pine pitch and dry earth from the sparse vegetation. He was deliberately taking a shortcut back towards Latigo, a path less traveled, instead of following the more commonly used winding trail that snaked across the broad expanse of Whetstone Basin. He felt the sweat trickling down his temples beneath his hatband, the silence pressing in. Rip Campbell was relatively new to the vast, rugged territory of Wyoming, but his hard-won reputation for quiet courage and lightning-fast gunplay had preceded him, echoing up from the ranges of Colorado. It was that very reputation that caused the desperate, respectable citizens of Basin County, plagued by lawlessness, to send for him, electing him sheriff the very instant he met the residency requirement. He had been a fighting deputy down in the rougher parts of Colorado, earning his spurs where trouble was brewed strong and served often. Before his arrival, Latigo, nestled uneasily at the basin's edge, had been relentlessly overrun by shadowy gangs of bandits and brazen rustlers who preyed with impunity on the hard-working cattlemen scattered across the vast, lonely ranges. Good men, honest men, had become fearful. No one with sense would take the thankless, dangerous job of sheriff, for a death warrant seemed intrinsically woven into the very fabric of the badge itself. Several had tried, none had lasted. Things had changed, dramatically and swiftly, since the blue-eyed, slow-smiling Rip Campbell pinned on the six-pointed star that proclaimed him sheriff of Basin County. The pervasive rustling that had bled the ranchers dry had stopped almost overnight, vanishing like mist under a hot sun. Outlaws who had ridden roughshod grew cautious, watchful. The first 4 posses, meticulously organized and personally led by Sheriff Campbell, had returned grim-faced but successful from the tangled, imposing foothills of the Big Horns. They returned with several riderless horses trailing behind, their former occupants either resisting futilely or bound securely in the saddle, a hard-won batch of prisoners destined for Latigo's sturdy jail. Some of those, after due process, faced the ultimate justice administered by the newly resolute arm of the law, hanged until dead, a stark warning to others. Campbell had certainly heard the persistent swirling rumors, carried on the wind and whispered in saloons, that the notorious Monty Roper and his vicious gang of crooks were supposed to be holed up somewhere deep back in the jagged, formidable maze of the Thundergist Range, a wild, untamed uplift of rock and shadow. But those brooding mountains lay just outside his official jurisdiction, a frustrating technicality. He knew, with a certainty born of experience, that he would have to wait, patiently or impatiently, for Monty Roper to make the first overt move, to cross that invisible line back into Basin County. Trouble, Campbell knew, was Roper's trade. Lately, however, things had been deceptively quiet, almost peaceful, throughout the wide sweep of Whetstone Basin for several weeks. The usual undercurrent of tension had seemed to ebb. And so that day, taking advantage of the lull, he had ridden purposefully up into the lower, sun-scorched Thundergist foothills. His stated reason was plausible enough, collecting the modest annual license fees from the few scattered, solitary trappers who eked out a harsh existence in rough-hewn huts perched along the rocky rim of the basin. But beneath the surface of official duty, he had held another, more pressing purpose in seeking out old Frank Barnes, the quiet, watchful Arapaho half-breed. Barnes was a man seldom seen in Latigo, appearing only on rare occasions when necessity drove him in for essential supplies or to trade his carefully prepared wolf hides for a few dollars or the raw solace of whiskey money. Barnes possessed the innate, uncanny tracking shrewdness inherited from his Indian mother, combined with the stubborn dependability of his Yankee father. He knew the tumbled, confusing labyrinth of the Big Horns intimately, from the highest, spike-toothed granite ridge down to the lowest, sand-choked bottomlands where hidden springs sometimes flowed. He read the land like an open book. Because of these unique qualities, Rip Campbell recognized immediately that Frank Barnes would be an invaluable, trustworthy deputy to have stationed strategically in this remote, vulnerable sector of Whetstone Basin. If the rumors held true, if Monty Roper and his wolves were indeed lurking somewhere nearby in the Thundergist shadow, then having a trusty deputy or two posted quietly about the basin's outskirts, which also marked the boundaries of Basin County, might prove exceedingly handy when trouble inevitably flared. Eyes and ears in the wilderness. Rip had found the incumbent deputy, Finn Staley, already in office when he first arrived in Wyoming, and took the oath. Although the perpetually stoop-shouldered deputy seemed content performing tasks no more important or dangerous than collecting saloon taxes and sweeping the office floor in Latigo, Rip Campbell harbored a deep instinctive lack of confidence in the man. Staley's eyes rarely met his, and his face seemed permanently set in a sullen cast. While he possessed no open, concrete evidence sufficient to dismiss Staley outright, Campbell felt a gut certainty, a lawman's intuition, that the scar-faced deputy was as crooked and potentially dangerous as a coiled diamondback rattlesnake sunning itself on a warm rock. But for various practical reasons, mainly because Staley was, admittedly, fairly dependable for watching after the routine office business while Campbell himself was away patrolling the vast county, he had not yet been dismissed. Dealing with Staley was a problem postponed, not resolved. Barely an hour before hearing those fateful shots, Rip Campbell had stood near the Sweetwater Seep, the sparse cottonwoods rustling overhead, and pinned a newly minted deputy's star onto Frank Barnes's sturdy buckskin vest. He had clapped the brawny, weathered half-breed reassuringly on the shoulder as the trapper prepared to climb into his saddle for his trapping rounds. "This won't likely incur any hard work, Frank. Just keep your eyes peeled," the sheriff had told his new deputy, his voice low and confidential. "Keep this badge and our arrangement strictly under your hat for now. But if you happen to see Monty Roper or any of his known gang members drifting this way, just get word to me. Fast. Don't try to tackle them alone. I'll handle the rest." Barnes had offered a rare brief grin, the lines around his eyes crinkling, and pointed significantly towards his empty knife sheath hanging at his belt. Not even a holster marred the line of his hip. He explained again, he was merely on his way to set some new traps deeper in the canyons for the troublesome timber wolves that plagued the lower slopes of the Thundergust Mountains. On such routine trapping excursions, focused solely on his quarry, he never even bothered to carry his heavy, ancient Sharps rifle. Too cumbersome for setting snares. "Dang it all. I really wonder who fired those shots," muttered the young sheriff again, more forcefully this time, his voice tight with unease as the last faint echoes of the second report finally died out, absorbed by the hot, stifling, waiting air. "It's a stone-cold cinch Barnes didn't have a gun, not even a pea-shooter. And nobody else honest lives up in this forsaken stretch of country, nobody, outside of horned toads, rattlesnakes, and maybe crooks." Rip Campbell's handsome, usually open face knitted into a sharp, worried frown. The skin tightened around his clear eyes. It was a solid 2-hour ride, maybe longer pushing hard, back to the relative safety of Latigo, and he had ostensibly attended to all the official business he had planned out in these desolate badlands. Yet somehow, insistently, a cold prickle of a hunch, that intangible sixth sense that kept range riders alive, told him urgently to investigate those mysterious, unexplained shots that had wafted so strangely to his ears out of the remote distance. "Dang it, horse. Looks like we're going back along the trail a ways. Have ourselves a look-see anyways," the sheriff grunted decisively, making up his mind. He wheeled his responsive roan horse about with a light touch of the reins, turning back towards the rugged country he'd just left. "Learned a long time ago. If we don't play our hunches now and again, we'll likely never get anywhere in this country, or maybe end up planted 6 feet under." Rip Campbell was, undeniably, a striking figure of lean, capable manhood in any kind of surroundings. Even now, with the fine alkali trail dust lying thick as gray powder on his intricately hand-tooled chaps, and clinging to the fabric of his practical black shirt with its simple white piping trim, he somehow looked fresh, alert, and eminently fit. Ready for anything. His face was bronzed by the relentless sun and wind, tanned to a healthy, ruddy hue. His strong neck, corded with muscle, showed beneath the loosely knotted, bright orange neckerchief at his throat, a splash of defiant color against the muted landscape. A beaver-colored Stetson hat, stained white in patches where the alkali dust had clung stubbornly to the sweatband, was pushed back slightly on his head, displaying thick, sweat-plastered locks of dark brown hair plastered over his broad forehead. Two formidable frontier-model colts rode low and easy at his hips, their smooth bone stocks slick and pale, worn comfortable to his grip from long and frequent use. The holsters were well-oiled, open-topped, and ingeniously swivel-mounted, a practical trick for faster drawing whether mounted or on foot, something he had picked up years ago during a stint chasing outlaws down in the Arizona Territory. Campbell kept his keen, storm-blue eyes constantly moving, scanning the rugged skyline ahead, sweeping the brushy slopes and shadowed draws as he rode back. One hand rested lightly, almost casually, on his thigh, yet remained poised, swinging free near the accessible butt of the right-hand .45. Somehow, those two distant shots, brief punctures in the hot, silent atmosphere, had struck an unexpected, illogical cold chill deep in his veins, a premonition of wrongness he could not easily shake off. The air itself felt charged, expectant. He quickly reached the faint but discernible trail where Frank Barnes, the trapper, had worn his solitary way along the crumbling base of a low, brushy ridge. He turned his horse onto it, following the tracks, retracing his own recent steps back towards the vital landmark of the waterhole at Sweetwater Gulch, the very place, near the trickle of water and the sparse shade, where he had proudly pinned the deputy's badge on Frank Barnes's vest such a short time ago. He kept his sharp eyes constantly scanning the upflung, chaotic maze of canyons and dry arroyos that dissected the land around him. His gaze swept over the brushy peaks, still green at lower elevations, and the naked, sun-blasted rocky slopes higher up. Patches of quaking aspen and slender willow dotted the country immediately about him, near any hint of moisture, gradually turning to the hardier jack pine and gnarled juniper, the ever-present pinon and cedar, as his eyes lifted farther up the distant hazy blue slopes marching towards the main Thundergust Range. The landscape was utterly, profoundly still. It was the heavy, watchful stillness that often preceded violence, as silent and unnerving as Boot Hill Cemetery at the stroke of midnight. Not even a bird called. Then, beneath him, he felt his horse suddenly tense, its muscles quivering, ears pricked forward intently. It faltered in its stride, then shied sharply, nervously to one side as they entered a long, narrow juniper-flanked draw carved deep into the land. And as Campbell instinctively jerked his eyes away from the distant upland panorama, focusing sharply on the trail directly ahead, he saw the reason for his mount's sudden terror. Sprawled horribly, unnaturally, between two jagged granite cusps thrusting up like broken teeth from the dusty pit of the draw, lay the crumpled, motionless figure of Frank Barnes, the wolf trapper. The newly pinned deputy's star on his vest caught a stray sliver of sunlight, glinting obscenely. Chapter 4. Sheriff Rip Campbell moved with the fluid grace of a man whose life often depended on instinct and swift reaction. His spur rowels sliced through the thick, hot air, tracing a flashing arc of reflected sunlight as he vaulted decisively from the saddle. He didn't hesitate. He plunged sideways, burying himself instantly within the concealing embrace of the dense, thorny chaparral bordering the grim scene in the draw. He was far too trail-wise, far too wary of the deadly nature of this country, to foolishly expose himself to the same hidden rifle, the same unseen menace that had so brutally cut down his trapper friend moments before. One heavy, bone-handled .45 Colt appeared as if by magic in his lean, sun-brown hand, its long barrel carefully prodding aside the dry, scratching bramble as he peered cautiously out, his storm-blue eyes narrowed, absorbing the shocking tableau. "I'll be eternally danged," he whispered, the words escaping slowly, drawn out in disbelief and rising fury. The sound was barely louder than the arid whisper of the breeze through the stiff brush. Some low-down, yellow-bellied skunks gone and dry-gulched poor old Frank. Ambushed him. Like a coward. Campbell had witnessed much of death, violent, bloody death, during his hard years wearing a badge across the raw, unforgiving landscapes of the West. Gunfights in dusty streets, grim discoveries on lonely plains, the aftermath of saloon brawls. It was a currency he tragically understood. But this killing, the cold-blooded murder of his newly sworn deputy, Frank Barnes, less than perhaps 10 minutes after the man had proudly accepted the responsibility and the emblem of the law, struck him with a profound, sickening shock. It left his tanned face suddenly beaded, dripping with an ooze of oily, cold sweat despite the baking heat. The silence of the gulch seemed to press in, amplifying the horror. Scant minutes ago, standing near this very spot, he had watched the simple, honest glow of pride kindle deep within the half-breed's dark, steady eyes as he carefully pinned the nickeled, six-pointed emblem onto his sturdy vest. A symbol of trust, now a target. Carefully, with infinite patience born of long practice, his gaze swept every inch of the surrounding country. He scanned the chalky bluff opposite, the juniper-dotted slopes climbing away on either side, the shimmering heat waves rising from the rocky floor of the draw. His eyes searched for any betraying sign of life, the unnatural shaking of a juniper branch, a telltale puff of dust disturbed by a boot heel, the glint of sun on metal. Nothing. The vast, sun-drenched world was as empty and silent as a forgotten tomb, save for that tragically still, crumpled figure lying exposed out there under the merciless sky. The buzz of flies gathering near the body was the only sound breaking the profound quiet. Gun held steady, jutting forth before him like an extension of his own grim resolve, Rip Campbell crept cautiously from his hiding place. His boots made almost no sound on the loose scree and dust. A moment later, he stood over the cruelly torn body of his friend, then knelt beside it on the sun-baked earth. The coppery smell of blood mingled with the dry scent of dust and sage. An inch below the still gleaming nickeled star pinned crookedly on the half-breed's vest was a ghastly, dark bullet wound, the surrounding buckskin stained black and stiff with drying blood. Campbell's breath hitched, and he suddenly gasped aloud, a sharp intake of air, as a terrible dawning flood of realization washed over him, cold and certain. "Dang," he breathed again, the word choked with a mixture of grief and dawning fury. "They didn't kill Frank, they killed the star. They thought it was me. This badge. Damn this badge. They mistook him for me." Campbell's clear eyes misted for a brief, unguarded moment, as he reached out a trembling hand and gently covered the half-breed's contorted, dusty face with the man's own wide-brimmed Stetson which lay nearby in the dirt, knocked off during the fall or the brutal dragging. That sombrero, he noted with a fresh pang, was battered and shaped almost identically to the one Campbell himself wore. And the shirt Frank wore, now marred with a horrific, spreading stain of dark crimson flowering darkly over the front, was plain black, just like his own preferred trail shirt. The resemblance, coupled with the badge, had been fatal. With renewed, hardened purpose, the sheriff strode quickly over to the trapper's dead horse, lying in a heap a short distance away. A cloud of iridescent bluebottle flies buzzed angrily away from the carcass as the officer stooped low, his face grim, to examine the neat, precise bullet hole drilled into the center of the animal's forehead, from which still oozed a thick, sluggish trickle of dark scarlet blood onto the parched ground. All too plainly, the sheriff's expert, range-bred eyes, trained to read the subtle language of the trail, deciphered the brutal details of Barnes's murder from the disturbed earth and scattered marks in the thick dust. He saw the deep gouges where the dead man's body had been mercilessly dragged over the sharp rubble, saw the scuffed area near the rocks where the spur had finally caught fast in one stirrup before being ripped free with sickening force. The story was written there in the dirt, stark and ugly. Still securely lashed to the saddle's cantle was the rough gunny sack filled with heavy steel traps which Barnes had been planning to diligently set along his lines that very morning. Nearby, almost poignant in its uselessness, lay a hunk of raw, bloody liver, bound tightly with a length of string, the bait Barnes had likely been dragging behind his horse to lure unsuspecting timber wolves towards his hidden traps. A life dedicated to trapping predators, ended by the most dangerous predator of all. Setting his jaw, Campbell began to work methodically, the chilling details of the killing clearly fixed and analyzed in his mind. He cast about, his eyes missing nothing. It was a matter of perhaps 5 minutes of concentrated searching to find the ambusher's nest. The place, nestled high up in the dense chaparral on the shelving bank farther up the draw, where Barnes's killer had undoubtedly lain patiently in wait, concealed in the brush, overlooking the vulnerable stretch of Sweetwater Gulch below. A faint indentation in the dirt, a few broken twigs, the subtle disturbance of leaves told the tale. A few moments later, moving with quiet intensity, the sheriff's sharp gaze had spotted the killer's distinct boot tracks, heading purposefully away from the ambush spot toward the shadowed mouth of a nearby rocky defile. Just as I figured. Cached his horse back in here, out of sight while he was waiting for me to ride by, grunted the sheriff, his voice a low, dangerous growl in the stillness. And poor old Frank came along instead, minding his own business, setting his traps, and wearing that damned star. They plugged him, clean and simple, thinking it was me. The question is, who? Who knew I'd be here? Who wanted me dead badly enough to set a dry gulch trap? He straightened up, his gaze sweeping the silent landscape once more before turning back toward his own horse, patiently waiting where he'd left it. He gave a low, sharp whistle. A minute later, he was mounted again, settling firmly into the familiar creak of saddle leather, his rifle now resting across his lap. Without hesitation, he nudged the roan forward, beginning the arduous task of following the clear trail left by the ambusher's mount, the hoof prints leading away along the steepening slope which climbed inexorably toward the distant, rugged summit of the brooding Thundergists. 2 painstaking hours later found Sheriff Rip Campbell navigating his mount through the dense tangled brush which choked the narrow winding channel of a deep, gypsum-walled slit canyon, cutting into the great cliff face which effectively fenced in the western side of Whetstone Basin. The air grew thinner, the silence deeper, broken only by the crunch of hooves and the rasp of brush against his chaps. Carefully, relentlessly, foot by painstaking foot, he had traced the sequence of hoof prints that marked the flight of the dry gulcher who had so callously slain his deputy. Treacherous stretches of bare rock and the confusing, sun-bleached gravel of dry streambeds had baffled him at times, threatening to break the trail. But each time, with the unerring accuracy and dogged patience of a truly range-bred tracker, Campbell had circled, cast about, and inevitably recovered the faint signs, following the trail onward and upward as it pushed relentlessly higher into the wild, remote Wyoming uplands. Suddenly, without warning, with a sharp, agonized squeal of pain that tore through the quiet canyon, Campbell's faithful roan slumped heavily forward onto its front knees. It struggled desperately, recovered its footing with a lurching heave, then came to an abrupt, trembling halt, its head hanging low, eyes rolling white with agony. Instantly, Campbell knew what had happened. He felt the sickening shift beneath him. The horse, navigating the treacherous, rock-strewn floor of the canyon, had stepped awkwardly on a large, turning rock concealed by the brush, plunging its hoof into a hidden hole beneath. In that instant of wrenching recovery, it had severely strained or wrenched its shoulder. Campbell dismounted swiftly, landing lightly on his feet, his immediate concern shifting to his injured mount. He shook his head sorrowfully, a deep frown creasing his brow, as he ran expert hands over the animal's shoulder, feeling the heat and the trembling. "Easy, boy, easy now. No more traveling for you today, old horse," he muttered softly, rubbing the animal's velvety nose tenderly. "Looks like we'll have to hole up here for a bit, let you rest. We'll have to." A sudden, rising thunder, a drumming vibration felt more than heard at first, arrested the sheriff's attention mid-sentence. It grew rapidly louder, echoing strangely off the confining canyon walls, the unmistakable sound of multiple, fast-approaching hoofbeats. Instantly, every nerve in Campbell's body became taut, alert. Danger. Seizing his injured mount urgently by the bridle, ignoring its whicker of pain, he half-dragged, half-forced it backward, deeper under the shadowy shelter of the heavy tangled growth of willow and buckbrush which choked the narrowest part of the canyon through which he had just been riding. He was not an instant too soon. Even as he jammed his own body back into the concealing, scratching tangle of resilient brush, pressing himself flat against the cool rock wall. A large band of horsemen swept violently around a sharp bend in the blue-gray gypsum-walled canyon just ahead. They flooded past his hiding place in a deafening, chaotic thunder of pounding hoofbeats that completely drowned the low, pathetic whimpering of Campbell's injured pony. Dust billowed, thick and choking, swirling in their wake. Long after the last rider had disappeared around the next bend downstream, the thunder fading into the distance, there flashed vividly before Campbell's winking, dust-filled eyes the remembered image. The blinding glitter of bright sun rays reflecting off the barrels of many rifles held ready across saddles, the dull shine of shell-studded belts heavy with ammunition, the hard, purposeful set of grim faces glimpsed fleetingly through the dust. There could be but one logical, chilling explanation for this large gang of heavily armed horsemen riding urgently down out of the remote mountain fastness, heading directly towards the vulnerable settlements of the basin, towards Latigo. It had to be Monty Roper and his infamous gang, making their move at last. But that sudden, startling realization, ominous as it was not the primary reason the young, resolute sheriff of Basin County felt his body suddenly turn to ice, a cold dread gripping his very soul despite the canyon's baking heat. For among those rough, galloping horsemen who had fled past in a blur of motion and dust, Rip Campbell, with sickening certainty, had recognized one man's face. That man, riding grimly alongside the outlaws, was Finn Staley, his own duly appointed deputy sheriff. Chapter 5. 7 horsemen rode past the crossroads which marked the center of Latigo, and dismounted in front of the pole hitch rack before the Bald Eagle Saloon. Monty Roper stood with one high-heeled boot on the ground, the other in the stirrup. His black eyes roved like a cougar's over the seat of his saddle. Like a camera, his glance photographed every detail of the scene: the crowd of sleepy loafers who sat in the shade of the Elkhorn Hotel, the cow-ponies which gathered in one corner of the nearby Livery Barnes pole corral, the false-fronted bank building across the street. It was shortly after noon, and Latigo was taking its siesta. Bluebottle flies droned against the grimy window panes of the Bald Eagle barroom. The half-hearted tapping of a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil came from somewhere. Roper stepped away from his horse and dusted his chaps. He was a tall, straight man whose eyes gleamed like ebony. A sleek mustache curved over a mouth that wore a perpetual droop. He wore his Stetson at a rakish angle on his head. The unbuttoned vest was much too short, exposing several inches of salmon-colored shirt which disappeared under twin gun belts. His looks were not striking, but there was a firm outthrust to his jaw that showed authority. The rest of his gang were a motley lot of gunslingers, stamped with the unmistakable marks of hunted men: shifty eyes, tied-down guns, nervous hands always hovering near 6-gun butts. Roper ducked under the hitch rack and strode up the steps of the Bald Eagle, his spurs jangling as he crossed the rough plank flooring of the porch. His arms swung carelessly as he went into the open barroom of the saloon and stopped before the mahogany counter. His men followed him, lining up along the brass rail. Roper's brow knitted in deep thought as the barkeep served the gang with liquor. He felt that he had everything planned out. There were not too many people in town. His horses were not clustered about the bank, with a man or two holding them, the way more than one slower-witted bandit had made his fatal error by brazenly advertising the fact that a bank was being robbed. Sheriff Rip Campbell, according to Finn Staley's signal, was out of the way. They had met Staley on Circle Ridge, but had left the deputy back in the hills to await their return. That left the town unprotected as far as the law was concerned, and the residents of Latigo were too sleepy at this time of day to note what was going on. Having gulped down a stiff drink, Roper twisted on his heel and sauntered casually outside. Not a breath of air stirred. Dust, kicked up by his restless horses, lay thick on the sultry air. Out of the corner of his eye, Roper noted that his men had left the bar and were grouping themselves at the gambling tables. There was a clear view of the bank from where they sat. The outlaw chief jerked his head. Out of the group came 2 men. Pecos Stalcup was a great ape-like gunman who had blazed a red trail of crime through Texas. Juan Solis was a Mexican with a broken nose splattered across his ugly features. Together, they were a pair of the fastest gun aces who ever fanned a hammer. The three men sauntered slowly down the length of the Bald Eagle porch. Loafers eyed them from under tilted hat brims. Some paused in their whittling to glance at the big outlaw's stag-handled guns. But they were not notched. Monty Roper was too crafty to advertise the fact that he was a gunman. The outlaw smiled grimly to himself. Not a suspicious glance had been cast their way. The town had accepted them for what they appeared to be, a party of cattlemen, stopping in town for a few minutes to rest their horses and swallow a gulp of red-eye. Many such paused at Latigo before going on into the Big Horn Basin. Roper fumbled in his salmon-colored shirt for the makings. He shook tobacco into a brown paper as he walked slowly across the wheel-rutted crossroads. Little puffs of dust eddied behind him. At his heels, like faithful dogs, marched grim-faced Stalcup and the plodding brown-skinned Mexican. The Cattleman's Bank was a false-fronted structure with small street windows. Its front door opened on a small lobby, which masked the bank from the outside. Roper paused at the door of the bank to scratch a match on his trousers leg and light his Querlee. A quick glance through sun-puckered eyelids showed him that no one was taking any particular notice of his presence in town. He knew that inside the Bald Eagle, his men, apparently interested in card games, would be watching him. They would be ready for any trouble that might occur. But he was expecting no hitch. Things went smoothly when Monty Roper planned a robbery. Roper opened the door and crossed the lobby. Stalcup and Solis remained outside, leaning carelessly against the building, thumbs hooked in gun belts. The outlaw noted, with a quick gleam of satisfaction in his eyes, that there were no customers in the bank at this hour. Only a bald-headed clerk toiling over a ledger, and a wrinkled old banker standing behind the teller's cage, absorbed in his work. "Howdy," Roper exchanged the curt greeting of the cow country as he paused before the teller's window. A thin stream of blue smoke filtered from the cigarette plastered on his tongue as he fumbled in a pocket for a bit of paper. "Got a check I'd like to cash," grunted the outlaw, thrusting forward a folded bit of soiled paper. "Aim to buy some stock feed in town today." The teller picked up the check, his eyes searching Roper's suntanned face as he unfolded the paper. "You're a stranger in town, ain't you?" the banker asked. "If you can get someone to identify," he broke off, his face suddenly paling. For there, printed in heavy black letters on the blank check, were two words which rose to smack the banker in the face: Monty Roper. A metallic click sounded, and the teller glanced up to see the black eye of a .45 barrel lying over the marble counter in front of him. "This'll identify me," the bandit said between motionless lips. His eyes bored past the teller to fasten on the form of the clerk busy at his desk. The bandit's voice dropped to a hissing whisper: "Get me currency, lots of it, quick." The teller gulped. Sweat burst from his wrinkled old face. Then he nodded and reached a gnarled hand toward his cash box. Under the marble counter before him, the teller had an arrangement for just such an emergency as this. His bank had never been robbed, but Rip Campbell, the new sheriff, had suggested a clever device for his protection, which he had installed. It was a Colt .45, clamped under the desk on a swivel. Its trigger had been removed, so that the mere flick of a thumb on the knurled hammer would send a bullet pounding through the thin wooden panels into the body of a bank robber. That gun, hidden from Roper's sight by the table, was pointing squarely at the big outlaw's midsection. The teller's hand trembled as he reached in the cash drawer beneath the level of the desk. He tossed a fat bundle of greenbacks on the counter, saw Roper's salmon-pink sleeve rake in the money. Again he reached down, this time to produce a roll of $20 gold pieces. For a third time, the banker's hand vanished beneath the edge of the counter. But this time, his trembling thumb snapped the hammer of that clamped-down 6 gun. Brung! The marble-topped counter trembled under the explosion of the gun, and the teller saw the steely-eyed bandit wince as the bullet tore into him. "Blast you!" screamed the outlaw, his lips peeling back from clamped, gritting teeth. "Blast!" Boom! Roper twisted aside, at the same instant triggering his huge six-gun, point-blank at the staring teller's face. With a moan, the banker's head snapped back, as the bullet punched a blue hole in the middle of his forehead. The teller's body was knocked backward, and he collapsed under the plunging cloud of blue smoke which fumed from the swivel-mounted gun under the counter. Chapter 6. Disoriented by the searing pain in his hip, Monty Roper swayed precariously on his dusty boot heels, the acrid stench of gunpowder thick in his nostrils, mingling with the metallic tang of his own blood. He fought for balance amidst the echoing chaos within the small bank building, the air vibrating with the recent concussion of gunfire. With a snarl, twisting his lips beneath the sweat-dampened mustache, he swung the still-smoking barrel of his heavy six-gun back toward the defiant figure of the bank clerk. He yanked the trigger again, the hammer falling with a sharp click. He heard the bullet clang violently against the thick barred grating of the teller's cage, whining off the metal, then thudding solidly into the plastered wall on the opposite side of the room, showering fine white dust. The bandit instinctively dropped low, almost hitting the dusty floorboards, as he saw the clerk, face pale but set with grim determination, turn back, smoothly snaking up the ominous twin barrels of a stubby-nosed scattergun. Boom! The shotgun roared, a deafening blast that filled the confined space, momentarily drowning out the frantic sounds from the street outside. A deadly swarm of buckshot ripped through the cage bars, slicing violently through the air just inches over Roper's ducked head, before streaking like angry hornets across the now empty bank lobby and explosively shattering a thick-paned window overlooking the main street. Shards of glass, glittering like deadly diamonds, rained outward onto the boardwalk, mingling with the spent lead pellets that clattered against the clapboard siding opposite. As the deadly cascade subsided, the wounded outlaw, adrenaline surging, snapped erect, ignoring the throbbing fire in his hip. Across the counter, the clerk's hands, suddenly nerveless, dropped the now empty shotgun onto the counter with a clatter, and started instinctively, uselessly, sealing Ward in a gesture of surrender. Bang! An instant later, before the clerk's hands reached shoulder height, Roper's Colt spoke again, its report sharp and final. The big-bore slug smashed the unfortunate clerk full in the face with sickening impact, snapping his head back violently. He dropped without a sound, instantly lifeless, falling behind his counter like a poleaxe steer. Wasting no time on the dead, Roper twisted, peering urgently through the dust-mote-filled lobby toward the shattered front window and the bullet-riddled double doors. Outside, Latigo's main street had erupted. He saw his gang boiling frantically out from the swinging doors of the Bald Eagle saloon opposite, their own guns thundering in ragged, desperate volleys. Sharp, cracking rifle shots answered them immediately from multiple directions, windows, doorways, rooftops. The sturdy bank building itself seemed to tremble under the relentless hail of lead smacking into its wooden facade. Through narrowed, staring eyes, Roper saw Pecos Stalcup, one of his toughest men, suddenly flung backward as if hit by a giant fist, dumped unceremoniously onto his back by the heavy impact of a .30 to .30 slug. Even as he fell, Pecos fired his pistol blindly, defiantly, towards the sky before reeling back against the bank's rough wall, stone dead, his body instantly riddled with more bullets from the unseen townsfolk. Everything, absolutely everything, had gone disastrously wrong. Roper cursed himself viciously under his breath, a stream of invective against his own carelessness, against the sheer, unexpected audacity of the bank clerk, for letting the man pull such a suicidal stunt. He hadn't counted on this kind of bull-headed, organized resistance in a sleepy town like Latigo. Wiping impatiently at the warm, sticky crimson stain rapidly oozing through his torn trousers from the wound high on his hip, he assessed it quickly, just a flesh wound, painful but not crippling. The teller's nervous hands, shaking with fear or fury, must have joggled the swiveled shotgun's barrel at the last second, sending the main blast meant for his stomach inches wide. Roper grimaced, He'd survived worse. Many such close calls had punctuated his violent career. Luck, or the devil himself, had ridden with him before. Outside, his remaining men fought desperately against a town roused instantly from its midday stupor, galvanized like a poked hornet's nest by that first fateful gunshot from inside the bank. Little did Roper know or care in that moment that the town's new sheriff, Rip Campbell, had meticulously drilled nearly every able-bodied citizen for precisely this kind of emergency, organized with the cool efficiency of a seasoned fire chief preparing for a 5-alarm blaze. Roper knew with cold certainty that he should cut his losses, flee immediately for his horse hitched down the street. Survival screamed at him to run. But Monty Roper was forged of tougher, or perhaps simply more arrogant stuff. Pride and greed warred with instinct. He sprang abruptly across the room towards the back offices, the searing pain in his hip momentarily forgotten in the renewed surge of adrenaline, leaving a trail of bright crimson spatters on the dusty floorboards. A heavy steel door leading towards the vault clanged loudly behind him as he charged through. In seconds, driven by ingrained habit and avarice, he'd located the main cash drawer, roughly scooping its entire contents, bills and coin, into a small, brightly colored silk bag hastily produced from inside his flamboyant pink shirt. Leaping carelessly over the sprawled legs of the dead clerk, ignoring the glassy stare, he vanished into the shadowed confines of the bank's vault. Papers crackled underfoot, drawers grated harshly as he ransacked the small space with furious intensity. Flimsy locks broke under heavy blows from his Colt's butt, wooden deposit drawers splintered and smashed under furious booted kicks. He emerged moments later, hat jammed low over his eyes, his face pale and drawn but set in a hard mask, a big Colt gripped tightly in his hand. Edging cautiously along the polished wainscoting towards a side window that offered a view back towards the street, his heart sank. He saw his last man, the Mexican known only as Solis, stagger and fall before the bullet-scarred entrance of the saloon, overwhelmed by a torrent of gunfire. Campbell's training, damn him, had worked with lethal effectiveness. Roused townsmen, no longer panicked individuals but a coordinated fighting force, now crouched grimly behind the saloon's ornate mahogany bar, steadily pumping lead across the street towards the doomed bandits. Even the hotel idlers, usually content to whittle and gossip on the shaded veranda, had charged bravely across the dusty street into the fray. Roper had seen one fall dead on the saloon's very threshold, likely from Solis's final, desperate shot. But that death only directed an even heavier, more concentrated flood of lead back toward the now silent bank door, a veritable wall of bullets no ghost, let alone a living man, could have hoped to escape through. Stalcup and the Mexican had gone down fighting, the thunder of their own guns still echoing in their ears as death claimed them. The bitter, unfamiliar taste of first defeat burned in Roper's throat. He knew, with chilling certainty, that this bloody showdown in this insignificant town might very well cost him his life. Trying for his horse now, out there in that bullet-swept street, was naked suicide. Then, sharp and clear, amidst the gunfire and his own pounding heart, his Diamondback's instinct for survival buzzed a desperate warning, a sudden flicker of hope, the livery stable. He recalled its location instantly, that dusty corral full of horses just down the street past the blacksmith shop. His lifelong ingrained habit of instantly memorizing the layout of any new town, noting potential escape routes, now offered a sliver of a chance. Bam! The bank's main front door, already weakened, crashed violently inward off its hinges, splintered wood flying. Heavy boots thundered into the lobby. The wild mob, faces grim and flushed with victory and vengeance, stormed in. Roper acted without thinking, pure instinct taking over. He frantically stuffed the bulging silk loot bag deeper into his shirt, the coins digging painfully into his ribs. His darting eyes spotted a narrow back door, likely leading to an alley or storage area. Stooping low beneath the level of the teller counter, making himself as small a target as possible, he streaked like a wraith across the floor towards it. Bang! Bang! Bullet holes magically appeared, splintering the thin wood panels of the door just inches from his head, as he hooked a desperate spur over the simple doorstop inside, and backed swiftly through, frantically firing his Colt back into the milling confusion of the mob flooding the lobby. He saw two men stumble and fall, attempting to charge through the doorway after him. With a final surge of strength, he slammed the flimsy door shut. Trapped. He found himself in a cramped, musty supply closet. Rough wooden shelves laden with stacks of ledger paper, checkbooks, bottles of ink, and various janitor supplies lined the confining walls. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and cleaning chemicals. A single, heavily barred window set high in the far end seemed to mock him, sealing his fate as the angry roar of the mob surged into the bank's main room just beyond the thin door. The seemingly glamorous, bulletproof career of Monty Roper appeared ignominiously finished, cornered like a rat in a dusty closet. Then his desperate eyes spotted it. A heavy steel securing bar fastening the window's rusty iron grill, but crucially positioned on the inside. Hope surged anew. Steady, albeit blood-slicked, fingers fumbled for a moment, then slid the heavy bolt free from its bracket with a protesting screech of metal. He threw open the creaking bars. At that exact moment, bullets crashed furiously through the closet door from the other side, mowing down rows of ink bottles, splattering dark fluid like grotesque bloodstains across the shelves and floor. Roper's mustache twisted in a grim, wolfish smile. They thought they had him trapped, shooting him out like a cornered animal. Hot, bright sunlight struck his face like a physical blow as he wriggled frantically through the narrow, dusty opening. He dropped with a painful grunt, landing heavily in a narrow, refuse-strewn alleyway squeezed between the rear brick wall of the bank and the soot-stained wooden side of the adjacent blacksmith shop. Empty, rusty cans scattered noisily beneath his worn boot heels. Slipping like a shadow, hugging the rough brickwork, he reached the alley's end at the blacksmith shop corner. Peering out cautiously, he emerged into a cluttered open area littered with broken wagon wheels, discarded harnesses, and heaps of rusted junk iron. 20 yards away, blessed sight, stood the sturdy corner post of the livery corral. Footsteps thundered heavily around the bank corner behind him. A running figure appeared, a young cowboy, face determined, waving a big long-barreled 6-gun. Roper didn't hesitate. His own Colt flamed instantly in his hand, the shot echoing flatly between the buildings. The cowboy cried out, clutched his chest, and dropped heavily in the dust without firing a shot. Spur rowels twinkled in the sun as the desperate bandit, already reloading his Colt with practiced speed as he ran, fled across the open space for the relative safety of the corral fence. He snatched a coiled rope from a nearby snubbing post as he vaulted the wooden rails, heading straight for the milling cluster of horses, his movements momentarily masked from the street by the bulk of the blacksmith building. 2 minutes later, furious screams of rage and thwarted vengeance erupted from the main street, as someone finally spotted a lone, bareback rider galloping madly through the wide livery corral gate, leaning low over the horse's neck, vanishing swiftly over a low, brushy rise just beyond the edge of town. Rifles chattered belatedly, lead flew wild, kicking up harmless dust plumes far behind the fleeing figure. Monty Roper, the man they said had 9 lives, had escaped again. Chapter 7. Sheriff Rip Campbell, grit clinging to his sweat-soaked clothes and exhaustion weighing heavy on his lean frame, finally halted, leading a painfully limping horse that faltered and stumbled with nearly every grueling mile covered. The poor roan's breath came in ragged, dust-choked gasps, its injured shoulder slick with sweat and trembling visibly. Campbell raised a weary hand, signaling his injured mount to stop on the hard-won crest of a rocky divide. Below them stretched the immense, sun-scorched panorama of Whetstone Basin, a vast bowl shimmering under the relentless afternoon heat. Far across that desolate expanse, the cluster of buildings that was Latigo appeared as little more than an insignificant brown smudge smeared against the monotonous drab hillsides, looking fragile and lost in the immensity of the landscape. But it wasn't the distant town that held Campbell's sharp, unwavering attention. His gaze, narrowed against the glare, fixed instantly on movement far below. A galloping horse, reduced by distance to just a single, laboring black dot, crawling determinedly across the pale, cracked earth of the basin floor. Yet, even as a mere speck, there was an undeniable urgency to its flight, the unmistakable silhouette of a rider pushing his mount hard. The lone horse and rider disappeared momentarily from Campbell's view, swallowed by the deceptive green tangle of willow-choked lowlands marking a meandering creek bed, only to reappear moments later, smaller now, climbing steadily into the rolling, brush-covered foothills on the far side of the basin. Simultaneously, Campbell's keen eyes spotted another cluster of moving dots, emerging like angry ants streaming from the direction of Latigo, spreading out as they raced across the flats in hot pursuit. Roper's gang making a run for it, or maybe a posse, the sheriff gasped aloud, his voice raspy with dust and fatigue. Looks like they're chasing that lead rider, whoever he is. Turning briefly to soothe his exhausted horse with a gentle pat on its sweaty neck, Campbell quickly untied a worn, cylindrical leather case strapped behind his saddle cantle. From it, he withdrew a pair of powerful, brass-fitted field glasses, heavy and cool in his hand. Raising them to his eyes, shielding the lenses from the direct sun, he adjusted the focus wheel with practiced care until the distant, heat-hazed world leapt into sharp, almost startling clarity. Every stunted bush, every heat-blasted rock on the far slopes stood out, stark and defined. The distant horsemen pursuing the lone rider remained somewhat indistinct, blurred by their speed and the swirling dust clouds kicked up by their passage, but Campbell could now clearly see the intermittent harsh glint of sunlight flashing off rifle barrels held ready, and watch the individual puffs of dust rising beneath dozens of furiously pounding hooves. A determined chase indeed. Shifting the powerful gaze of the lenses slightly, tracking the solitary figure ahead of the pursuit, Campbell suddenly tensed, his breath catching in his throat. The lone rider sprang into sharp, undeniable focus. A man, hatless, riding desperately, clinging low and bareback Indian style to his clearly laboring mount. Even across the vast distance, magnified by the lenses, Campbell could see the fugitive constantly, frantically looking back over his shoulder, his arm rising and falling, as he spurred viciously, relentlessly at the lather-streaked flanks of his clearly exhausted horse. The animal stumbled, nearly fell, recovered, and plunged onward. "Well, I'll be eternally damned," Campbell exclaimed aloud, his voice tight with astonishment and sudden dawning suspicion. For abruptly appearing in his field of view, riding out from a concealing fold in the foothills seemingly ignored by the pursuing posse, was the unmistakable figure of Staley, astride his familiar pinto paint horse. The deputy's perpetually stooped figure, the way he sat the saddle, even the distinctive steeple-peaked crown of his old hat, were all instantly recognizable, undeniable even at this considerable distance. But what in God's name was Staley doing here, miles from town, intercepting a desperate fugitive? Understanding, cold and unwelcome, dawned with chilling clarity as Staley angled his horse sharply, cutting off the bareback rider in a patch of dense brush that effectively hid them both from the view of the scattered oncoming posse. Campbell, glued to the eyepieces, watched the silent, distant drama unfold through the powerful glasses. He saw the panting fugitive gesture wildly, frantically, back towards the basin, towards the pursuing riders now fanning out, clearly losing the trail in the confusing terrain. Then Campbell saw the fugitive reach inside his torn, incongruously salmon-colored shirt and pass Staley a small, dark object. It looked like a black bag. After a rapid, urgent exchange of unheard words, marked only by sharp gestures, the bareback rider wheeled his spent horse abruptly, heading directly towards the rugged, towering peaks of the Thundergust Range, looming dark against the western sky, a path that would quickly take him clear of the scattered posse now hopelessly lost in the tangled chaparral below. Staley watched him go, then turned his own horse, melting back into the concealing brush. "Well, I'll be jiggered." Campbell lowered the glasses slowly, scratching his head in profound bewilderment, a deep frown etched between his brows. His mind raced, trying to piece together the impossible scene he had just witnessed. What was in that bag Staley had so furtively concealed beneath the folds of his trail slicker before calmly riding off in a different direction, away from both the fugitive and the posse? The sheriff carefully stored his field glasses back in their leather case, his movements automatic while his thoughts churned. He turned and began the slow, arduous descent down the rocky slope, leading his hobbling horse, the pieces clicking into place with sickening certainty. Staley's presence here, the rendezvous, the past bag, the earlier ambush meant for him that had killed Frank Barnes. It all pointed one way. The connection between his crooked deputy, the mysterious bareback rider, likely the ringleader of the gang that hit Latigo, and Frank Barnes' cold-blooded murder felt suddenly, chillingly solid. "I'll just ask Mr. Staley straight out," Campbell muttered grimly to the unheeding landscape half an hour later, his voice low and hard, as he finally led his limping horse down into the familiar shadowed environs near Sweetwater Gulch, the place where his grim day had truly begun. He had no business being out of town today, none at all. Playing sick, was he? I'll make him talk turkey by thunder when I catch up to him. He's got explaining to do, and plenty of it. The faint, familiar creak of saddle leather nearby cut his thoughts short. Instantly alert, Campbell paused, pulling his horse to a stop behind a dense thicket of fragrant pine. Peering cautiously through the screen of green needles, he saw Staley not 20 yards away, dismounted in a small, sun-dappled clearing. Staley seemed utterly oblivious to observation, entirely focused on his furtive task. The deputy retrieved the small black bag from beneath his slicker, glanced around quickly with shifty eyes, then knelt and began prying with considerable effort at the edge of a heavy flat-topped granite slab half buried in the clearing's sandy soil. With a final grunt, he lifted the edge of the stone enough to shove his ill-gotten treasure into the shallow depression beneath it. He let the slab fall back with a dull thud, carefully brushing away the signs of disturbance. As Staley straightened up, dusting off his hands with an air of grim satisfaction, Campbell deliberately stepped out from behind the pines. His tall figure cast a long, sudden shadow that fell directly across the stooped deputy. Staley whirled around as if struck, a choked gasp escaping his lips. His eyes widened in shocked disbelief, then sheer terror as they fixed on the tall figure standing before him. His face contorted, lips drawing back from yellowed teeth in a cornered animal's snarl, as he stared into the sheriff's cool, unwavering blue eyes. "What you got buried there, Finn?" Campbell asked quietly, his voice dangerously level, his gaze flickering meaningfully between the hastily repositioned boulder and Staley's bulging, fear-crazed eyes. For one utterly frozen, heart-stopping second, Staley swayed on his feet, his mind clearly struggling to reconcile the impossible reality before him, staring at the very man he'd orchestrated the murder of, the man he'd believed dead since that morning's ambush. Then, the paralyzing shock shattered. With a frantic, high-pitched scream that echoed chillingly in the quiet clearing, his hand flashed down, a blur of motion towards the worn holster at his hip. Sunlight glinted wickedly on polished steel, as Staley's six-gun leapt into his fist and roared, the deafening explosion ripping through the peaceful afternoon air. Chapter 8. In an instant, the lithe figure of Rip Campbell was standing beside the stoop-shouldered deputy. The next, he had leaped back, palm slapping the butt of the .45 at his right hip. The two men fired at the same instant, but Staley's bullet pounded the dirt at his feet. Campbell had used his swivel holster at point-blank range, tilting the barrel of his six-gun without wasting the precious fraction of a second that means life or death in a gun duel at close quarters. Staley's wiry body was knocked spinning by the big slug that crashed through his chest. He reeled away, six-gun dropping from his nerveless grasp, to sprawl in a quivering heap 10 feet from the spot where he had gone for his gun. Choking, a crimson foam flecking his lips, the deputy staggered to his feet, eyes blurring dizzily as he picked out the form of the grim sheriff, standing there with the smoke of his .45 spiraling up to meet his sombrero brim. "Dang you. I'll get you," croaked the wounded deputy, clawing at his hip for the second gun. "I'll bang." A scream of agony blended with the savage bark of Campbell's gun, and holster and weapon were jerked from Finn's belt as his fingers groped for the 6-gun. Staley's knees suddenly buckled. He slumped earthward, his fingers shoved in the sand. Then he pitched face downward, limp and bullet-torn. "You forced me to it, Finn." Campbell was at the man's side, rolling him over. Strong fingers ripped open the deputy's shirt under the cartridge bandolier. Campbell shook his head as he saw the great wound which the bullet had torn. It had pierced Staley's left lung, a couple of inches above the heart, and shattered against the shoulder blade before passing completely through the traitor's body. The deputy's eyelids flickered. He blew red foam off his lips, tried to speak. Campbell ran to the deputy's horse and unlooped a canteen from the saddle. He worked the lip of the water can into Staley's lips, forcing some of the cool liquid down the dying man's twitching throat. "What in blazes did you go for your gun for, Finn?" asked the sheriff as the wounded man thanked him with his eyes. "If I hadn't shot, you'd have drilled me plumb dead." Staley nodded. The pulse beats in his neck were growing feebler. The livid scar on his face seemed a yellow streak in the midst of a death-like pallor. "I thought I killed you this morning," whispered the deputy, his head rolling as Campbell pillowed it on his arm, getting the dying man's face in shadow. "I had this coming, I reckon." Campbell bent his ear to catch the man's whispered words. "You always been mighty white to me, Rip," went on Staley, choking. "Under that rock is gold from the bank at Latigo. Monty Roper just held up the place." A shiver racked Staley's body. Campbell felt part of that spasmodic chill transmitted to him. Monty Roper. So his deputy was an ally of the bandit chief. "Your system got all his men like I warned him it would," Staley went on. "Posse looking for him now. I was going to hide the cash and meet him. Tonight I was supposed to take the money to Roper and split. I thought," Staley's words faded. A few gulps of water from the canteen, and his strength seemed to revive. But Campbell could hardly catch the next words. "If you want to catch Roper," said the deputy, "you'll find him at Poker Table Butte, North Shoulder. There's a niche in the rocks where they camp. Sort of cave." Campbell was bathing the man's face with the tip of his orange neckerchief, dipped in water. He nodded. "I'll get him, Finn," the sheriff said tenderly. "If he's holed up at Poker Table Butte, I'll get him." Staley was panting heavily. Campbell knew that death was but a matter of heartbeats away. "If you go," Staley said, "go tonight. Listen, Rip. I want to do something, for I die to atone for the way I've been doing, Rip. I tried to kill you. Now, I'm going to save your life. Listen, Rip. Roper's up there, only 2 of his men left now. He'll think you're me, bringing the gold back tonight like I promised. But listen. You got to have the password before you can get in the cave. Then you can get the drop on them." Campbell felt his heart pounding furiously. What was this about a cave, a password? He bent closer to get the next words. "When the sentry challenges you," gasped the deputy faintly, "say cuidado. It means honor in Spanish. It's Roper's password. He talks Mex. It'll get you in, Rip. Let me hear you say it, Rip. So's I'll die knowing you got it right. Otherwise, he'll shoot you in the dark. Say it, Rip." "Cuidado," Campbell gulped. "Cuidado," he replied huskily, his voice caught with emotion, tongue tripping over the foreign word. "Thanks, Finn. We'll call our score square for this." "Cuidado," whispered the deputy, his eyes gleaming like red coals under the fluttering lids. "That's right." A series of awful coughs shook the deputy's frame, and when they had finished, Rip Campbell rose to lower a dead form to the sand. "Poor guy," muttered the sheriff, as he gazed at the man who had tried to kill him twice that day. Tried to atone for his crookedness. Silently, the sheriff went over to the stone where the deputy had hidden the silk bag. He rolled it over, and in a few moments was handling the packets of greenbacks and rolls of coin which Monty Roper had taken from the cattleman's bank. Nodding the sack, Campbell went to the deputy's waiting horse. It was fresh, and would do to carry him to Poker Table Butte if he wished. The sheriff tied the treasure sack around the horn. He unsaddled his limping roan and hobbled it. He would need to know where it was, so a veterinary could come after it once he reached town again. Campbell emptied the contents of the dead man's canteen into the crown of his sombrero and let the jaded horse drink. That done, he mounted Staley's paint horse and spurred off through the chaparral. Coming to the edge of the tableland, he slid the animal down a cut bank and found himself near the willow-grown waterhole called Sweetwater Gulch. Just around the bend, he knew the body of Frank Barnes lay in the sand. If I'm going to smoke Monty Roper out of his own nest, I mustn't let that posse come along with me, or we'd lose him sure, he decided. And it'll take me until after sundown to get to Poker Table Butte. The ashes of several dead campfires caught his attention. He remembered that this was a favorite camping place of Frank Barnes, being sheltered from the night winds and close to a waterhole. Sight of the piles of gray ashes and charred sticks gave Rip Campbell an idea. Swinging from the saddle, he took the sack of gold and currency and buried it in the heart of the nearest ash heap. He covered it over with dead embers and charcoal. Then he fanned the ashes with his hat brim, obliterating all marks of fingers or boots. He would not want to take such a valuable object along with him on the trail to Poker Table Butte. And he could not wait to deliver it to the posse men, should he encounter them out in the Malpais. Securely buried here, it would never be discovered. Rip Campbell climbed back in the saddle and jabbed spurs into the pinto's flanks. They were heading toward the point where Poker Table Butte reared its majestic height into the red gleam of the sinking sun. Somewhere under those frowning rocks was an outlaw's den. He had a dying man's word for the key to that snake nest of outlawry, cuidado, the word that Staley said meant honor. Smiling grimly, the young sheriff wondered how much the dead deputy had known about honor. Horse and rider set off across the rolling divides, as the sun dipped beneath the far distant rim of the horizon. Chapter 9. A pale, ethereal moonrise found Rip Campbell seated heavily astride Staley's weary, blowing pinto horse, gazing upward, neck craned, at the absolutely overwhelming, towering walls of Poker Table Butte. It was a monstrous formation, climbing straight up from the broken land, a sheer, colossal wall of ancient rock that seemed impossibly immense, appearing to physically support the cold, star-dusted arch of the night sky. The newly risen moon, nearly full, peeped cautiously around one massive stone shoulder of the great butte, its light spilling down like a solitary flake of pure, polished silver lying upon the distant cloud-wisped roof of the world. He had reached the vicinity of the formidable north shoulder, the specific area of this great, isolated outcrop of rock, vaguely mentioned by the treacherous Finn Staley, as death had stared him coldly in the face back in Sweetwater Gulch. It was undeniably a wild, raw, desolate country, brutally scoured by wind and time, far too rough and precipitous for anything much larger than sure-footed bighorn sheep, and likely too barren and unforgiving to sustain even them for long. An absolutely ideal place for a hidden outlaw den, Campbell concluded grimly, a sudden involuntary shiver tracing its way down his spine despite the residual heat radiating from the dark rock. At any second now, he knew, peering into the deep wells of shadow pooling at the butte's base, he might be challenged by the unseen sentinel, whom Staley, in his final gasps, had claimed the outlaw band kept posted somewhere near the hidden entrance of Roper's remote hideout. The sheriff had made his careful, calculated plans during the long, punishing ride. He knew, or thought he knew based on Staley's dying confession, that he likely had but 3 men left to face, that is, if a traitor's last words could possibly be trusted. And despite everything, Campbell still clung to the old range belief that a dying man facing his maker would not be likely to waste his final breath on a lie concerning such details. Riding up bold as brass through the revealing moonlight, mounted conspicuously aboard Staley's easily recognizable pinto horse, He calculated he would likely be accepted as the returning deputy until he got within decisive close range. Roper, according to Staley, was expecting Finn back around this very hour, bringing the stolen bank loot represented by the black bag Campbell now carried securely inside his own shirt. He had deliberately left his gleaming sheriff's star pinned to his vest. In the uncertain moonlight, from any distance, they could not possibly tell its specific engraving from a common deputy's badge. And Campbell had absolutely no intention of getting close enough for the trio of outlaws to read it, not without him being in complete absolute command of the situation. As he rode slowly along, deeper now under the dense, almost palpable shadow cast by the mighty butte, he consciously hunched his broad shoulders, subtly mimicking the characteristic stooped posture of the dead Staley. Let them think it was Finn returning. Let them keep believing that Rip Campbell, the meddlesome sheriff, was lying cold and alone out there in Sweetwater Gulch, already buzzard-picked and stiff as a dried board by now. The deception was his only edge. "Hi, fella." The pinto shied violently, snorting in alarm, nearly unseating him as a deep, gravelly voice called out softly, unexpectedly, from an inky blot of profound shadow clinging to a massive boulder mere inches to one side of the narrow game trail. Campbell felt his pulses give a sudden, sharp thrill, his heart leaping into his throat, as he instantly drew rein, fighting to control the spooked horse while simultaneously wheeling it to face the challenge. His wide-brimmed sombrero was clamped down tightly over his head, deliberately throwing his own grim, determined face into concealing shadow. "Hi," returned the sheriff, careful to keep his voice muffled and low, deliberately jerking the pinto's bit slightly, making it seem as though he was having his hands full controlling the nervous animal. He didn't know the protocol. Was he supposed to give the password immediately, or wait for a specific invitation? He could feel, almost physically sense, the unseen sentry's eyes boring intently through him in the heavy gloom. The silence stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring. "Password, Finn?" grunted the voice impatiently, and Campbell saw a tall, shadowy figure detach itself from the deeper gloom beside the boulder, emerging cautiously, carrying the long, dark shape of a rifle cradled ready in his arms. "Reckon it ain't strictly necessary, seein' as how it's you, Finn," the sentry added, slightly more relaxed now. "But the chief, well, he's a real stickler for form, you know how Monty is." "Sure," grunted Campbell, his free hand hidden from the sentry's view by the bulk of the horse and his own body, carefully loosening the heavy .45 Colt in its well-worn holster. He gathered himself, remembered the word Staley had gasped out. "Cuidado." The sentry halted abruptly, his relaxed posture vanishing instantly, as Campbell spoke the single Spanish word with soft, deliberate distinctness. The sheriff was now so close, he could almost reach out and touch the crown of the man's sombrero. He saw, even in the deep darkness, the sentinel's muscles tense rigidly. A sudden icy chill snaked down Campbell's back. What had he done wrong? Had he mispronounced the strange Spanish word Staley had given him? He felt his spine turn into a pole of ice as the sentry took a sharp breath, opening his mouth to speak, suspicion hardening his tone. "What? Where'd you hear it, dang?" The sentry gave a startled yelp and leapt back instinctively, lifting his rifle barrel swiftly, reaction finally overcoming confusion. But Campbell was faster. Thud. There sounded a sickeningly dull, wet thwack of heavy metal impacting solidly against bone, and the sentry crumpled without another sound, flopping in his tracks like a loosely filled sack of grain. In one vicious, efficient sweep, Rip had leaned far over and clubbed the surprised sentry hard across the temple with the long barrel of his own Colt, rendering him instantly unconscious. The sentry's rifle made no metallic sound as it fell, cushioned against the man's inert body. The cruising moon, momentarily escaping its nest of filmy high clouds, poked through suddenly, bathing Campbell's taut, strained face in a soft, silvery glow as he quickly swung down from the pinto. His skin dripped with cold sweat, despite the cool night air, as he quickly stepped deeper into the protective shadow clinging to the butte wall. Handcuffs retrieved from his pocket clinked faintly, musically in the profound stillness, as he swiftly and efficiently shackled the senseless man's wrists securely behind his back. Rip Campbell thought bitterly, his lips curling in contempt, of Finn Staley, the utterly treacherous double-crossing deputy who had served his dark master even in death, deliberately giving him a false password, a final act of betrayal, even as death's icy fingers were closing remorselessly about his own throat. Honor among thieves, indeed. Leaving the trained pinto horse to stand ground hitched, effectively serving as guard over the unconscious sentry's still form, Campbell stepped quickly, silently, along the shadowy base of the immense cliff wall, his drawn Colt now held ready in his hand. Moving with extreme caution born of long, dangerous experience, his senses straining in the darkness, he rounded the first massive, projecting shoulder of rock. The night wind, cooler here out of the direct moonlight, fanned his hot face as he edged his way carefully around the cold granite, his worn boot soles making absolutely no noise in the loose rubble and sand accumulated at the cliff's foot. What deadly surprise lay waiting just around the corner? His heart began to pump noticeably faster, thudding against his ribs like a trapped bird, as his eyes caught the first flickering, telltale sign of firelight dancing erratically on the smooth face of a nearby boulder just ahead. A second later, peering cautiously around the rock projection, he saw it, a cheerful campfire blazing merrily inside the low-arched mouth of a shallow cave, painting the curved rock ceiling and walls with vivid shifting strokes of crimson and orange. And squatted comfortably about the flickering blaze, their backs turned unsuspecting toward the cave entrance, were the shadowed forms of two sombreroed men. A fierce, savage thrill, the primal surge of the hunter finally closing in on his quarry, surged hotly through the sheriff's body, as he instinctively drew his other gun, cocking both hammers softly, and stepped cautiously out from the shadows into the open space before the cave. There they were, the remaining two outlaws, just as Staley had indicated. The two men hunched by the fire, perhaps drowsing, clearly had no inkling whatsoever of Campbell's silent, deadly approach, as he crept stealthily forward across the smooth rock floor leading directly toward the mouth of the cave. Snap! A small, dry twig, unseen in the shifting shadows, snapped sharply beneath the sheriff's boot heel, the sound barely audible above the cheerful crackling and popping of the campfire. But it was enough. At the tiny, unexpected sound, both men at the fire started violently, nervously. One of them twisted about instantly on his heels, peering into the darkness outside the circle of firelight, a startled exclamation rising from his lips. "Stick 'em up high, Roper." Like the sudden, high-pitched snarl of an attacking mountain cougar, Rip Campbell's voice cut whip-crack sharp through the night air, echoing angrily off the hard granite walls of the shallow cavern. Speechless with utter dumbfounded amazement, the two outlaws leapt instantly to their feet, their hands instinctively hovering, hesitating for a fatal second near the butts of their holstered guns. Campbell strode purposefully forward into the firelight, his own face set like granite, glowing a fierce demonic red in the dancing light reflecting off the twin leveled barrels of his two heavy 6 guns. The startled bandits took one hard look at the unwavering, dark bores of the sheriff's .45s aimed squarely at their chests, and their hesitant hands immediately climbed high, reaching well above the level of their hat brims. They were caught, utterly flat-footed, exposed, and powerless to make so much as a single desperate move toward the heavy guns belted uselessly at their hips. Campbell, maintaining his advantage, swiftly holstered one of his Colts. The other, balanced firmly, rock-steady in his big lean hand, wavered slightly between the two captured men, its muzzle weaving almost hypnotically like a poised snake's head ready to strike. Yet both outlaws clearly knew, reading the cold determination in the sheriff's eyes, that a single false move, the slightest twitch towards a weapon, would bring instant deadly bullets. "Keep 'em high," warned the young sheriff sharply, his free hand reaching cautiously into a hip pocket. The firelight flashed briefly off another pair of glittering steel handcuffs. "All right, now we'll just talk business after I've brung." Like the unbelievable, deafening blast of a ton of dynamite, exploding directly under his very eardrums, Campbell heard the stunning crash of a six-gun erupting right at his side. The sudden pungent fumes of burnt gunpowder stung sharply in his nostrils as he jerked instinctively back, his right hand battered and suddenly numb where a heavy .45 slug had miraculously torn the six-gun violently from his fingers, sending it skittering across the cave floor. Then, before he could fully react, a cold, hard Colt muzzle punched him brutally in the side, spinning him around, and he turned in shocked disbelief to face the triumphant, leering visage of Monty Roper himself, standing not 3 feet away at his very elbow, appearing as if from nowhere. Chapter 10. Dizzy with pain, the sheriff's hands groped upward. The handcuffs clanged on the rocky floor as the sheriff dropped them. A wave of sickness mounted in Campbell's body as he felt the outlaw king reach forward swiftly and lift his remaining six-gun from its holster to toss it aside in the darkness. "Thought you'd pull a fast one on us, hey?" snarled Monty Roper, his voice as cruel as the hiss of a viper. "Well, Mr. Tin Badge, this time tomorrow our carcass is going to be buzzard bait, savvy?" The two outlaws by the fire rushed forward, swearing with delight. One of them picked up the handcuffs which the sheriff had dropped. A moment later, Campbell's hands were locked securely by the cold steel manacles. His dizziness passed, and he realized for the first time the peril of his situation. "Dang me. I thought we was done for," exclaimed one of the bandits, wiping an ooze of damp sweat off his face with a bandana. "But when I heard him say, 'Stick 'em up, Roper,' I knew he didn't see you out there in the dark." White teeth flashed in the campfire light as the outlaw chief turned once more to his victim. Reaching out, he frisked the sheriff thoroughly and produced from a chap's pocket the officer's keys. "Take these and unbutton the hobbles on Louis's hands, Ruskin," the outlaw said. "Drag him in. He's knocked colder than a nit by this salty tin star." The two outlaws departed to get their senseless lookout. Monty Roper turned to the helpless sheriff with a cruel grin. "Short o' stoves the wind out of your bellows, don't it?" he chuckled. "If you would have come 5 minutes sooner, you'd have got away with it, Busky. But I had just got up to go out and look to see if Finn Staley was coming yet. I get out there just in time to hear you say, 'Cuidado,' and see you gunwhip Louis Gould. Then I had to wait for you to get around this rock, where I could get the drop on you without showing myself." Campbell was silent. He was looking about, frantically. But no possible chance of escape did he see. Finn Staley, seconds before he had died, had tricked him twice, once with the fake password, again by telling him that only 2 of Roper's men remained out of the gang. "Why didn't you salivate me then?" demanded the officer, his eyes like twin chunks of blue ice. Roper chuckled. "I didn't plug you for a danged good reason," he replied. "I wanted to find out where that gold and greenbacks is that I got out of the bank today. I got brains enough to know it ain't on your horse. We lost 6 men on that job, so I ain't a-leavin' without the loot, too." A sigh of relief heaved Campbell's chest. He had been expecting a knife blade or a bullet from these human vipers. But now he held something over them, the knowledge of where the loot was buried. The two outlaws came back, carrying the limp form of Louis Gould, now released from his handcuffs. The bandit named Ruskin handed the keys to Roper. "I thought Campbell was supposed to be dead," grunted the outlaw, as the two lowered Louis's body on a pile of blankets back in the shadows. "Here he is in person. Dang it, boss. It looks like Finn Staley's double-crossed us, don't it?" The outlaw chief shook his head. "No, he didn't," Roper said. "In the first place, I held too much over Staley. He wouldn't have dared double-cross me. No, I think Finn Staley is the one who's dead, not Rip Campbell. Because the sheriff gave us the fake password tonight. I told Staley to use that in case of a showdown, and he did." Campbell felt his veins turn to ice. So, even with death staring him in the face, Finn Staley had been afraid to go against the orders of Monty Roper. As he looked into the bandit's cruel, wide-set eyes, Rip Campbell felt the power that the great bandit held over men. A leader had to be hard to ramrod a gang as rough as his had been. "Campbell, I'm going to kill you." Roper's voice was quiet as he pronounced the death sentence on his helpless victim. "But before you die, I'm going to ask you one thing. Do you know what cuidado means?" Campbell shook his head, numb with rage. "Cuidado is Spanish for beware," Roper explained in a soft, cold voice. "You warned us with your own lips when you rode up on Staley's horse tonight. Tell me, Campbell, where did you put the gold you got from Staley?" Campbell's lips bared in a sneer. He was in great pain. His injured hand was dribbling a crimson stream from flesh wounds where the trigger guard had sliced his fingers. His wrists ached under the heavy manacles, pressed too tightly about them. But he shook his head scornfully. "It'll take a dang sight more than a rat-faced crook like you to get that out of me, Roper." The bandit grinned, rubbing his face with a salmon-colored sleeve. His eyes roved over to the campfire, where the outlaw Ruskin was throwing on chunks. "Tall kind o' salty fare jasper that's handcuffed and unhealed, don't you, Campbell?" asked the outlaw. "Well, I'll say this. I admires bravery in a man when he's a shoestring from Boot Hill. I've met men o' your stripe before, Campbell. Nothing short o' fire itself would make 'em talk. And that, Campbell," the sheriff trembled at the man's chill tone, "and that is just what I'm going to use to make you talk. Fire." Campbell tensed, his flesh already wincing. He tried to speak, but his tongue clove to the roof of his mouth like a wad of dry cotton. Roper threw off his light-hearted mask. He became suddenly stern, cruel, terrible. Stepping back, he turned to his men. "Ruskin, Clark." The outlaw's voice rang like a quirt lash. "Grab Tin Star and show him how we heats our robber's roost higher. It's the first time we've been honored with such a guest, way out higher." Campbell jerked back, head twisting into the darkness as he searched for a place to run. But Ruskin's huge body hurtled through the air, and great arms like steel bands encircled his knees. Like a poleaxe steer, the captive's body crashed to the granite floor of the cavern. Squirming, kicking, twisting, the sheriff fought. His shirt was torn to ribbons. The handcuffs thudded metallically on the rock. Clark joined the fray, grunted with pain as a spur rowel sliced open his thigh. A moment later, they jerked the struggling officer erect. Clark's great hands locked behind Campbell's neck, the elbows making a strangle hold on the sheriff's throat. Ruskin's arms clamped themselves, locking Campbell's knees like the grip of a steel-jawed vice. His throbbing ears dimly caught the sound of footsteps as the two outlaws carried him to the campfire. Then, one man on either side of the raging flames, they swung the sheriff's body like a living bridge over the fire. Screams of agony ripped from Campbell's throat as the fire ate through his shredded clothing to blister the raw skin of his back. Weak and helpless from his beating at the hands of the two giants, his struggles were useless. "Tell us where the bank loot is and we'll stop," came Monty Roper's voice from one side. The big outlaw was standing by, watching the fiendish torture with no more mercy than he would have shown at seeing a spider thrown into the seething coals. Fire smote the sheriff's bare arms, sizzled the crimson which had clotted his injured hand. The heat against the fresh wound was unbearable, filling his whole body with agony. And then, like a shaft of lightning to his tortured brain, an idea came to Rip Campbell's mind, an idea which, if he could carry it out, might turn the tables in spite of the odds. I'll tell you," he gasped, sweat dropping like hot wax off his contorted face. "Tell us first, before you get off the fire." Monty Roper had leapt forward, face lighted by a devilish grin. "Hold him, men, till he tells." The flames were cooking the raw wound on Campbell's hands. Fire was wrapping singeing coils about his skin, turning his shirt to ashes. In a few seconds, those deadly flames would be inhaled through his nostrils, and it would be all over. "Down in Whetstone Basin, campfire, ashes," screamed the tortured sheriff, body thrashing wildly over the leaping flames. "I'd have to take you there to show you." Roper nodded to his men. Clark and Ruskin tossed the tortured body of the sheriff into the cavern like a sack of grain. Delirious and fevered, screaming and twisting with pain, the sheriff's body was rolled back into the cool shadows to await the morning. Chapter 11. A dull throb rolled through Rip Campbell's body as dawn broke across the bighorns. He had spent the night flat on the cold floor of the outlaw hideout, tucked around the far shoulder of Poker Table Butte. At first light, the gang stirred. They'd kept a strict watch through the dark, always expecting the posse. Monty Roper climbed into a harness of leather straps and had himself hauled to the top of the butte by a horse pulling a rope. When he came back down, he said he'd seen nothing. Campbell didn't expect rescue. Without a sheriff, the town of Latigo would do little. Maybe they'd found Frank Barnes's body, maybe Finn Staley's too. But none of those town men would dare cross the scrub and rock between Whetstone Basin and Poker Table Butte. The gang made breakfast over the fire where they'd tortured him. Campbell got no food, only a few cold stares and a kick from Louis Gould, the same outlaw he'd nearly killed the night before. Roped and raw from the fire, Campbell was shoved onto his paint horse. The others mounted, and they started the long ride across the badlands. The sun was high when Roper, Campbell, and two others reached the edge of Whetstone Basin. They moved slow, stopping on every ridge to scan for signs of pursuit. Roper wasn't risking a thing. He led the way, picking a path through rough passes and narrow gulches. Campbell followed, hands cuffed, wrists aching so bad he could barely hold the reins. Gould stayed behind at the butte, still punch-drunk from the night before. Trailing them were Clark and Ruskin, two brutes grinning like hyenas. Campbell knew what was coming. Once they had the gold, they'd kill him. But still, a sliver of hope lived in him. The kind you don't share or speak aloud. He'd pulled through worse before, but nothing like this. They neared Sweetwater Gulch, a flat stretch dotted with scrub. Campbell's eyes narrowed at the sight of it. He knew they were close. Roper stopped at the rim of a bluff and turned. "This the place?" Roper asked, smug and low. "Where's it hid, Sheriff?" Campbell looked past the outlaw to the old ashes by the waterhole. The gold was buried under one of those mounds. "I'll show you," Campbell rasped. "Ain't far." He swung stiffly from the saddle. His wrists were raw, flesh swollen over the cuffs. Roper hadn't once loosened them. Campbell scanned the land again, hoping for a posse. But none were near. They'd followed the wrong trail, Barnes's tracks deep in the mountains. The sheriff staggered, knees buckling. He barely kept upright. Roper kicked him hard. "Move it, lawman," he snapped. "Show us that loot." Campbell shuffled forward. The others climbed down and followed. Together, they dropped into the gulch. Dust rose around them. Then a chance, just a flash. Whack! Campbell swung his arms and smashed the cuffs into Clark's skull. The outlaw dropped with a groan. A gun brushed the sheriff's hands. He grabbed it as Clark fell, turned and fired. One shot, Ruskin buckled. Two more, his chest bloomed red and he collapsed at Campbell's feet. The sheriff spun, pistol hot in his hands, vision blurred with dust and blood. Then crack. Roper's gun barrel crashed down. Stars burst in Campbell's skull. The world spun away. Chapter 12. He felt the gun being jerked from his grasp, but his muscles were powerless to resist. Then Roper's fingers seized his black shirt in a grip like a goshawk's talons, and his body was dragged out into the gulch, away from the swimming pall of dust caused by their slide down the chalky bluff. It had all happened in 10 seconds. In the time of 10 heartbeats, death had swooped down and gone. Clark, knocked cold by the sheriff's unexpected punch, lay under the stiffening corpse of Ruskin. And a few feet away, Monty Roper was dragging the quivering form of Rip Campbell. A stab of pain, as if a red-hot iron was being punched through his breastbone, dragged Campbell to his senses. He opened his eyes to find himself propped up against the sun-drenched bank of Sweetwater Gulch. Monty Roper was squatting before him, an evil grin on his features. In his hands, he held a heavy knife made of a file, the point thrust against the sheriff's stomach. "You notice I had sense enough not to kill you when you got ringy," grated the outlaw, leering like a panther. "And the reason I didn't kill you was this. You're going to take me right to the spot where that gold is cached, see?" The knife point was slicing into his body, bit by bit, like a needle being pushed slowly through the skin. Campbell knew now what was coming. The cruel outlaw was planning to stab him, let him die by slow degrees. "Where's the gold?" snarled Roper, adding pressure to the knife blade which made Rip Campbell go faint with pain. "I'll slash you 2 ribbons if you don't tell." Campbell lifted his manacled hands, the effort taking his last ounce of strength. With one crimson-flecked finger, he pointed toward the spot where Frank Barnes's campfires made a ring of pasty gray ashes out in the draw. I buried it under one of them campfires," screamed the tortured man, collapsing in a trembling heap under Roper's razor-edged knife. A taunting laugh blew from Roper's lips as he leapt erect, sliding the knife into its sheath. The sun glinted off the barrel of his .45 as he drew it from its holster. "Under one of them piles o' ashes, huh?" he taunted, hefting the gun in his hand. "Well, Campbell, now your time has come. Thought I'd let you free soon as I knowed where it was, did you? Well, I'm blowing your brains out now." Campbell felt his heart sink. He opened his eyes, returning Roper's cold, level stare as the outlaw lifted the gun to point it inches from his forehead. He gritted his teeth, determined to meet death with a firm heart. Tick. The hammer clicked back to half-cock as the bandit stooped forward to press the cold muzzle against his head. The sheriff struggled desperately to bring up his hands, but the blow on his skull had dazed him, and he could not move. Snap. The gun was at full cock now. Campbell's eyes protruded from their sockets, staring at the ugly blunt noses of the bullets in the cylinder. He saw Roper's trigger finger whiten at the joint as he squeezed tighter on the trigger. "Dang it." Roper stepped back, lowering his gun. "I better wait a minute till I gets my mitts on that gold," snarled the outlaw. "'Cause after I croak you, there ain't no way o' knowin' whar it is. Mebbe you was lyin' to me." Sweat poured from Campbell's face as he relaxed. Great beads rolled down his dust-caked neck. His staring eyes followed the big outlaw as Monty Roper strode out to the nearest pile of ashes, spurs clanking dully in the hot atmosphere. A yellow light sprang in the outlaw's eyes as he saw fresh hoof prints near the pile of ashes. He knew Campbell had been telling the truth then. He could see where a sombrero had fanned the ashes in place, hiding the marks. An insane laugh tumbled from Roper's lips as he dropped to his knees, reaching both hands into the feathery ashes, shoving aside the charred sticks as he plunged into the dead remains of Frank Barnes's campfire, fingers tingling to the expected feel of soft silk cloth. Crash. The metallic clank of a springing wolf trap sliced the air, a split second before a soul-chilling scream of agony burst from the bandit's lips. He sprang to his feet, both hands jerking from the ashes. Clinging to Roper's salmon-sleeved forearms like the jaws of a grizzly bear was a huge galvanized wolf trap, with ugly notched teeth sinking through flesh to crush bones. Roper's scream broke off as his jerking body brought the trap free from a geyser of leaping ashes, and a case-hardened chain nepped taut to its stake, driven deep in the ground. Like a dogie at the end of a rope, the form of Monty Roper flopped to the ground. Strength surged into Rip Campbell's muscles as he sprang to his feet and ran forward. He did not feel the pain as he leapt to the threshing outlaw's side and jerked the man's guns from their holsters. But Roper could not have gone for his irons. Campbell knew that both arms were broken under that vicious, clinging wolf trap, which would have held a powerful brute helpless in its steel grasp. Pity gleamed from Campbell's eyes as he fumbled through Roper's pockets for the keys to his handcuffs. Obtaining them, he clamped the key in his teeth. A second later, the steel bands, which had cut the circulation from his hands, fell to the ground. He was free. His hands tingled with life as he reached over and snapped the cuffs about Roper's wrists under the jaws of the trap. Then, with the barrel of a 6-gun, he pried the trap open and shoved the screaming outlaw to one side with his knee. For several minutes, Rip Campbell stood panting with exhaustion. Then he dragged the outlaw chieftain to a shady spot and climbed the short bank to obtain a canteen of water from one of the horses. "You dirty lion snake!" screamed the bandit, as the sheriff bathed his mangled wrists with water, after giving Roper a drink of the cool, reviving fluid. "You lying polecat!" Campbell shook his head. Getting to his feet, he crossed the draw, to stop before another pile of ashes, 5 feet from the one where Monty Roper had met his capture. He scraped in the charred remains of the fire to produce an ash-covered silken bag, which rustled with the crisp greenbacks and money rolls it contained. "I guess you never knew before," the sheriff said, returning to the outlaw's side, "that one of the best places a man can set his traps is under ashes. A coyote or a wolf'll dig in a dead campfire any time. That's why Frank Barnes yesterday morning set one of his traps under them ashes you prodded. I happened to be here and saw him set the trap a few minutes before Staley dry gulched Barnes, thinking he was me." Monty Roper's taut body collapsed. The homeless despair which floods a long rider's soul when he realizes the noose is ahead gleamed dully from the famous outlaw's red-shot eyes. "And I didn't lie to you," the sheriff said, glancing toward the spot where the horses awaited their trek back to Latigo. "I pointed toward the right campfire, but I knew you'd dig in the first one you came to, and that was where Frank Barnes planted his wolf trap yesterday morning. It was that little trick o' his that gave me the idea where to bury the loot. Poor old Barnes. He didn't realize at the time what kind of a wolf his last trap was going to catch. Happy trails. Want even more Wild Western adventure? Let me send you Wrangler for free. Check out Saddle Up, a massive Wild Western box set packed with 20 action-packed novels, over 3,000 pages.